In the bustling streets of a suburban neighborhood, where morning routines played out like clockwork, lived a middle-aged man named Mr. Singh. His life revolved around two things: his job as a senior accountant at Rivera and Associates, where he'd worked for 15 years, and his daily walks to work that took him past Sweet Morning's cafe. Every morning, Mr. Singh would notice a young man in a wheelchair struggling to navigate the steep ramp leading to the cafe. The young man, who everyone knew as Ray, had been born with cerebral palsy. Despite his condition, he maintained a small online business selling handcrafted jewelry, and the cafe was his unofficial office. One particularly challenging winter morning, Mr. Singh noticed Ray having more trouble than usual. The ramp had frozen overnight, making it dangerously slippery. Without hesitation, Mr. Singh approached Ray, offering to help. What happened next would change both their lives forever. "Let me help you," Mr. Singh said warmly, positioning himself behind Ray's wheelchair. As he carefully guided Ray up the ramp, a loud crash echoed from inside the cafe. The morning rush had caused a minor accident, and the cafe owner was frantically trying to clean up while managing the growing line of customers. Mr. Singh glanced at his watch. He was already cutting it close for his 9 a.m. meeting. But seeing the chaos inside and Ray's concerned expression, he made a decision that would later prove costly. He stayed to help, not just with getting Ray settled but also lending a hand to the overwhelmed cafe staff. The minutes ticked by as Mr. Singh helped clean up the spilled coffee, rearranged tables, and made sure Ray was comfortable with his laptop set up. By the time he rushed into his office, he was 45 minutes late for the crucial client meeting he was supposed to lead. His supervisor, Mrs. Chen, was furious. The client had waited for 20 minutes before leaving, potentially costing the firm a significant contract. When Mr. Singh explained his reason for being late, expecting understanding, he was met with cold disappointment. "Your kindness is admirable," Mrs. Chen said, her voice tight with frustration, "but this client was worth millions to our firm. Your priority should have been here, not playing Good Samaritan at a cafe." The next few hours passed in a blur of meetings and stern conversations. By day's end, Mr. Singh sat in the HR office, clutching a termination notice. 15 years of dedicated service ended because he chose to help someone in need that morning. Walking home that evening, Mr. Singh felt a strange mix of emotions. There was worry about his future, certainly. He had bills to pay and a family to support. But underneath the anxiety, he felt an unexpected sense of peace. He knew in his heart he'd made the right choice. What Mr. Singh didn't know was that his story was far from over. His act of kindness that morning had set in motion a chain of events that would not only transform his life but impact his entire community in ways he could never have imagined. As he passed the now quiet cafe, he saw Ray through the window, still working on his laptop. Ray waved, his smile bright and genuine, unaware that his new friend had just lost everything for helping him. Mr. Singh waved back, managing a small smile of his own. That night, as Mr. Singh sat at his kitchen table, updating his resume and browsing job listings, he received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Your kindness didn't go unnoticed." Little did he know, this email would be the first ripple of a wave that was about to change everything. The sun set on that difficult day, but it would rise on a tomorrow filled with possibilities Mr. Singh couldn't yet imagine. Sometimes, he would later reflect, losing everything is just the universe's way of making room for something better. But for now, he simply sat in his quiet kitchen, holding on to the belief that choosing kindness could never truly be a mistake. The mysterious email that landed in Mr. Singh's inbox that night came from someone who had witnessed everything at the cafe that morning. A young woman named Mrs. Patel, who ran a successful tech startup, had been quietly working on her laptop in the corner when the whole scene unfolded. She had watched as Mr. Singh helped Ray up the ramp, stayed to assist during the cafe crisis, and later learned through local social media about his subsequent firing. Her email wasn't just a message of support, it was an invitation that would change everything. "Your actions this morning showed me exactly the kind of person our company needs," her email read. "We're looking for a chief financial officer who understands that business success and human kindness aren't mutually exclusive. Would you be interested in discussing this opportunity?" Mr. Singh read the email 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. The position she was offering would be a significant step up from his previous role, both in terms of responsibility and compensation. But what struck him most was the last line of her email: "In our company, what you did this morning would have earned you a promotion, not a termination." The next morning, Mr. Singh found himself walking the same route to Sweet Mornings Cafe, this time for a job interview rather than his usual morning coffee. As he approached, he noticed something different. There was a small crowd gathered around Ray's usual table. Ray sat at the center, his laptop open as always, but today he was animatedly showing something to the assembled group. When he spotted Mr. Singh, his face lit up. "There he is!" Ray called out, waving him over. "The man who inspired all of this." Confused but curious, Mr. Singh made his way to the table. On Ray's laptop screen was a social media post that had gone viral overnight. Someone had captured a photo of Mr. Singh helping Ray up the ramp, and paired it with the story of his firing. The post had resonated with thousands of people, sparking a conversation about corporate culture and human kindness. Local news outlets had picked up the story, and Ray had spent the morning doing online interviews, sharing how this wasn't the first time Mr. Singh had shown kindness. Apparently, he had been quietly helping others in the neighborhood for years, though he never sought recognition for it. "People need to hear stories like this," Ray explained, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Stories about real kindness, about people choosing to do the right thing even when it costs them something. That's why I started sharing it." Mrs. Patel arrived for their meeting shortly after, ordering coffee for everyone present. As they talked, Mr. Singh learned that her company, NextGen Solutions, had built its entire corporate culture around the principle of compassionate business practices. They believed that treating people with kindness, employees, clients, and the community, was not just the right thing to do, but also good for business. The interview felt less like a formal questioning and more like a conversation between people who shared the same values. Mrs. Patel was particularly interested in Mr. Singh's ideas about how to create a corporate environment that encouraged employees to show kindness without fear of repercussions. As they talked, more people from the neighborhood dropped by the cafe, each with their own story about how Mr. Singh had helped them over the years. There was the elderly Mrs. Wu, who spoke about how he always carried her groceries up the stairs to her apartment. The teenage barista mentioned how Mr. Singh had helped him with math homework during lunch breaks. What amazed Mr. Singh was that he had never thought of any of these actions as special or noteworthy. To him, they were just the natural things to do when you saw someone in need. Yet here were all these people, sharing how his small acts of kindness had impacted their lives. The morning stretched into afternoon, and what had started as a job interview transformed into something more: a community gathering, a celebration of kindness, and the beginning of something new. Mrs. Patel didn't just offer Mr. Singh the CFO position, she proposed something bigger. "We want to start a community outreach program," she explained, her eyes alight with excitement. "Something that encourages and rewards acts of kindness in the corporate world. Would you be interested in heading that initiative alongside your CFO duties?" Before Mr. Singh could respond, Ray spoke up. "And I want to help," he said firmly. "My jewelry business is doing well online, but I've been looking for a way to make a bigger impact. Maybe we could collaborate?" As Mr. Singh looked around at the faces of his neighbors, the regular customers of Sweet Mornings Cafe, and his potential new employer, he felt something he hadn't experienced since receiving his termination notice the day before: hope. Not just for himself, but for the possibility of creating real change in how businesses viewed kindness and community involvement. The story of his firing, which had seemed like an ending just yesterday, was transforming into the beginning of something much bigger than himself. As the afternoon sun streamed through the cafe windows, Mr. Singh realized that sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as setbacks, and the biggest victories can grow from moments of apparent defeat. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would inspire not just his local community, but eventually, people across the country. The ripple effect of that one morning's kindness was about to become a wave of positive change. 2 months after that transformative afternoon at Sweet Mornings Cafe, Mr. Singh's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. His new position as CFO at NextGen Solutions came with an office that had a view of the city park, but he rarely spent his mornings there. Instead, he could usually be found at his old table in the cafe, working alongside Ray on their newest venture, the Ripple Project. The idea had started small, a simple initiative to recognize and reward acts of kindness in the corporate world. But like the ripples in a pond, it had grown far beyond their initial vision. Ray's social media expertise, combined with Mr. Singh's business acumen and Mrs. Patel's resources, had created something extraordinary. One morning, as Mr. Singh helped Ray set up his laptop, they received an email that made them both catch their breath. A major national news network wanted to feature their story and the impact of the Ripple Project. The producer had heard about how their initiative had already influenced dozens of companies to change their policies, encouraging employees to take time for community service without fear of repercussions. "Can you believe this all started because I needed help with that ramp?" Ray said, shaking his head in amazement. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you'd just walked past that morning." Mr. Singh smiled, remembering his old job at Rivera and Associates. He'd heard through the grapevine that after his story went viral, they'd lost several major clients who were concerned about the company's values. Mrs. Chen, his former supervisor, had been forced to revise their employee policies to include community service hours and flexibility for helping others in need. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. But the real success stories were the ones that touched individual lives. Like the junior accountant from a competing firm who'd stopped to help an elderly man who'd fallen on the subway, missing an important meeting but saving the man from serious injury. Instead of being reprimanded, she was acknowledged through the Ripple Project's recognition program, and her company had matched her act of kindness with a donation to a local senior citizen center. Or the delivery driver who'd spent his lunch break helping a single mother change her flat tire in the rain. The video, captured by a passerby, had gone viral through the Ripple Project's platform, leading his company to establish an emergency assistance program for stranded motorists. These stories were changing the narrative about success in the corporate world. It was no longer just about profits and deadlines, it was about the human impact of business decisions. As Mr. Singh and Ray prepared for their television interview, they received an unexpected visitor at the cafe. Mrs. Wu, the elderly neighbor Mr. Singh had helped with groceries countless times, shuffled in with tears in her eyes. She placed a local newspaper on their table, open to a full-page article about her son. "He works in Hong Kong now," she explained, her voice trembling with pride. After hearing about the Ripple Project, he started a similar program at his company. They're calling it the Singh Initiative, teaching corporate executives that kindness and success can go hand in hand. The cafe's young barista, now in his final year of high school, chimed in from behind the counter. "My math grades improved so much after Mr. Singh's tutoring that I got accepted to study business at university," he announced proudly. "And guess what? I got the Ripple Project's first scholarship for kind leadership." These personal stories of impact meant more to Mr. Singh than any corporate success. Each one represented a life touched, a perspective changed, a ripple that would continue to spread outward in ways they might never know. Later that afternoon, as they sat in the makeup chair preparing for their television interview, Ray turned to Mr. Singh with a thoughtful expression. "You know what's funny?" he said. "When I first started my online jewelry business, I thought I was just making pretty things. But now, we're creating something that's changing how people think about success and kindness." Mr. Singh nodded, understanding perfectly. His own definition of success had changed dramatically since that fateful morning. What had seemed like the worst day of his life, losing his job of 15 years, had actually been the universe's way of pushing him toward his true purpose. The makeup artist finished her work, and as they waited for the cameras to roll, Mr. Singh received a text message from Mrs. Patel. NextGen Solutions had just been named one of the country's top places to work, specifically cited for their community impact programs inspired by the Ripple Project. But what touched Mr. Singh most was the photo she attached, a new, gently sloping ramp being installed at Sweet Mornings Cafe, funded by anonymous donations from local businesses. The old, steep ramp that had started it all was being replaced with one that would be safer and more accessible for everyone. As the studio lights warmed up and the cameraman counted down to going live, Mr. Singh realized something profound. In trying to help one person up a difficult ramp, he had inadvertently helped build a different kind of ramp, one that made it easier for kindness to find its way into the corporate world. The red light on the camera blinked on, and Mr. Singh smiled, ready to share their story with the world. Not just the story of how he lost his job, but the bigger story of how sometimes, the greatest opportunities come disguised as setbacks, and how a single act of kindness can create ripples that touch countless lives. The television interview changed everything. Within hours of it airing, the Ripple Project's website crashed from the overwhelming traffic. Stories of kindness began pouring in from across the globe, each one a testament to the power of choosing compassion over convenience. Mr. Singh's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the broadcast. Among the flood of messages was one that made his heart skip a beat, an invitation to speak at the Global Business Ethics Summit in Singapore. They wanted him to deliver the keynote address about transforming corporate culture through kindness. "You have to go," Ray insisted during their morning meeting at Sweet Mornings Cafe. "Think about how many more people we could reach." He was already calculating the potential social media impact, his fingers flying over his laptop keyboard. But Mr. Singh was hesitant. He'd never spoken in front of such a large audience before, let alone to some of the world's most influential business leaders. "What if they don't take me seriously?" he wondered aloud. "I'm just an accountant who lost his job for being late." The cafe owner, who had been quietly wiping down nearby tables, paused. "Just an accountant," she echoed. "Mr. Singh, do you know what happened here yesterday? A business executive ordered coffee, then spent an hour helping me fix our broken window display. When I asked why, she said she'd seen your interview and realized she'd been too focused on deadlines to notice the struggles of small business owners around her." This wasn't an isolated incident. Similar stories were emerging everywhere. A tech company CEO in California had implemented a kindness hour, paid time for employees to help others in need. A manufacturing plant in Detroit had started a program where workers could bank overtime hours to use for community service. Mrs. Patel arrived at the cafe, carrying a thick folder of papers. "The Singapore summit isn't the only one interested," she announced, spreading out invitations from business conferences across Europe, Asia, and South America. "The Ripple Project is becoming a global movement." As they discussed the opportunities, a group of business students from the local university arrived at the cafe. They had started a Ripple Project chapter on campus and wanted to share their first initiative, a program matching business mentors with struggling small businesses in low-income neighborhoods. "We were inspired by how you helped Ray that day," one student explained. "It made us realize that business success doesn't have to come at the expense of human connection." Ray beamed with pride. His own jewelry business had grown exponentially since the story went viral. But instead of focusing solely on expansion, he'd hired 3 other people with disabilities, teaching them his craft and helping them start their own online stores. That afternoon, Mr. Singh visited his old office building. Rivera and Associates had requested a meeting, not for reconciliation, but for guidance. The company had lost its way, they admitted, prioritizing profits over people. They wanted to implement the Ripple Project's principles throughout their organization. Walking through those familiar halls, Mr. Singh felt no bitterness. Instead, he saw opportunities, empty conference rooms that could host community workshops, break rooms that could become meeting spaces for local support groups, talented professionals who could mentor struggling small business owners. As he outlined these possibilities to his former employers, Mr. Singh noticed Mrs. Chen, his old supervisor, sitting quietly in the corner. After the meeting, she approached him with tears in her eyes. "I've been wanting to apologize," she said softly. "The day I fired you, I was under immense pressure from upper management about that client. But watching how you've turned that moment into something so positive, it's changed how I view leadership." Mr. Singh learned that Mrs. Chen had started her own ripple of kindness. She now spent her lunch breaks tutoring immigrant professionals in business English, helping them navigate corporate culture while preserving their authentic selves. Later that evening, back at Sweet Mornings Cafe, Mr. Singh sat with Ray and Mrs. Patel, planning their trip to Singapore. The cafe had become their unofficial headquarters, its walls now adorned with photos and stories from the Ripple Project's impact around the world. "You know what's remarkable?" Mrs. Patel mused, looking around the busy cafe. "Every person here has a story about how kindness changed their life. We're not just building a business movement, we're documenting the human capacity for goodness." She was right. At one table, a corporate lawyer was helping a homeless man update his resume. At another, a group of executives discussed their company's new community service policies. The barista was explaining to customers how the cafe's new Pay It Forward system, inspired by the Ripple Project, had helped dozens of struggling neighbors afford their morning coffee. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow through the cafe windows, Mr. Singh opened his laptop to begin drafting his Singapore keynote speech. But before he could start, Ray interrupted with breaking news: the Ripple Project had been nominated for a prestigious humanitarian award. "They're calling it a revolution of kindness in the corporate world," Ray read from the nomination letter. "But you know what's better than any award? Look outside." Mr. Singh glanced out the window to see something that brought tears to his eyes. A young executive in a crisp suit was helping an elderly woman with her shopping bags, while another businessman held the door open for a mother with a stroller. Simple acts of kindness, once overlooked in the rush of corporate life, were becoming the new normal. Maybe, Mr. Singh reflected, this is what success really looks like, not numbers on a spreadsheet, but moments of human connection that remind us why we're here in the first place. The cafe owner brought them fresh coffee, refusing payment as always. "On the house," she insisted. After all, if you hadn't helped Ray that morning, none of this would have happened. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest ripple effects. The Singapore Business Ethics Summit was unlike anything Mr. Singh had ever experienced. As he stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces representing some of the world's largest corporations, he felt a surge of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. His speech began not with business statistics or corporate strategies, but with a simple story about a frozen ramp and a morning coffee. As he spoke, the grand conference hall fell silent, hundreds of business leaders leaning forward in their seats, many wiping tears from their eyes. "The true measure of success," he told them, his voice steady and sincere, "isn't in the contracts we sign or the profits we make. It's in the lives we touch when no one is watching, in the moments we choose kindness over convenience." In the audience, Ray sat beside Mrs. Patel, live-streaming the speech to thousands of followers worldwide. The conference hashtag was trending globally, with business leaders from Tokyo to Toronto sharing their own pledges to implement Ripple Project initiatives in their organizations. During the break, a Japanese CEO approached Mr. Singh with an interesting proposition. His company had developed an app that would help track and reward corporate acts of kindness, making it easier for businesses to implement the Ripple Project's principles. Would they be interested in a partnership? But it was a conversation with a small business owner from rural Thailand that truly touched Mr. Singh's heart. The woman had traveled 3 days by bus to attend the summit after reading about the Ripple project online. In her village, she had started a micro-lending program where loans were repaid not with money, but with acts of kindness to other community members. "Your story gave me courage," she told Mr. Singh through an interpreter. "In my culture, we have always valued kindness, but somewhere along the way, we started thinking it had no place in business. You showed us how to bridge that gap." Back at their hotel that evening, Ray shared the latest statistics from their website. The Ripple project had inspired over 10,000 documented acts of corporate kindness in the past month alone. Companies were competing not just for market share, but for kindness rankings. Employee satisfaction scores were soaring at participating organizations. "But here's the really interesting part," Ray said, turning his laptop to show Mr. Singh a graph. "The companies that have fully embraced the Ripple project's principles are seeing increased productivity and profitability. Kindness isn't just good for the soul, it's good for business." Mrs. Patel had been right all along. The next morning, as Mr. Singh prepared for his second day of presentations, he received an unexpected video call. The staff at Sweet Mornings Cafe had organized a surprise virtual gathering of people whose lives had been touched by the Ripple project. There was the barista, now in his first semester of business school, sharing how his class was using the Ripple project as a case study in sustainable business practices. Mrs. Wu proudly showed off her son's latest achievement, a kindness-based leadership program that was transforming corporate culture across Asia. The young mother with the stroller, who Mr. Singh had seen outside the cafe weeks ago, shared how that simple act of kindness from a stranger had inspired her to start a support group for working parents. The group now had chapters in 50 cities, helping parents balance career ambitions with family life. Even Mrs. Chen made an appearance, announcing that Rivera and Associates had completely restructured their corporate policies. They now offered employees paid time off specifically for community service and had established a mentorship program for small businesses in underserved communities. As Mr. Singh listened to story after story, he realized something profound. The Ripple project hadn't just changed corporate culture, it had tapped into a universal human truth that had been overshadowed by the pursuit of profit. People wanted to be kind, they just needed permission and encouragement to prioritize it. During lunch, he shared these thoughts with a group of business leaders from different countries. A South African executive nodded in agreement. "In my country," she said, "we have a concept called Ubuntu, the belief that our humanity is tied together. What you've done is bring Ubuntu to the business world." That afternoon, Mr. Singh and Ray led a workshop on implementing kindness initiatives in various corporate settings. The room was packed, with people sitting in the aisles and standing along the walls. But what struck Mr. Singh most was the energy in the room, the eager questions, the shared experiences, the genuine desire to create positive change. A tech entrepreneur from Brazil shared how she had modified her company's performance reviews to include measures of kindness and community impact. An advertising executive from Germany described how his agency now dedicated 20% of their resources to helping small nonprofits with their marketing needs. As the day drew to a close, Mr. Singh received news that left him speechless. The United Nations had taken notice of the Ripple project's impact and wanted to incorporate its principles into their global corporate responsibility guidelines. They were inviting him to speak at the next UN Global Compact meeting. That night, as he sat in his hotel room preparing for the final day of the summit, Mr. Singh opened his laptop to check his email. Among the hundreds of unread messages, one subject line caught his eye: "Thank you for being late that day." It was from a junior employee at his old firm, someone he barely remembered meeting. She wrote about how watching his story unfold had given her courage to stand up for what she believed in, to choose kindness even when it wasn't convenient. She had recently been promoted to management and was implementing her own ripples of change. Looking out at the Singapore skyline, Mr. Singh reflected on how far they'd come from that frozen morning at Sweet Morning's cafe. What had seemed like an ending, losing his job, had actually been the beginning of something far more meaningful than he could have imagined. His phone buzzed with a message from Ray: "Check out the cafe's security camera feed." Curious, Mr. Singh clicked the link to see the newly installed ramp at Sweet Morning's cafe busy with activity. People weren't just using it, they were stopping to help others, sharing smiles and conversations, building connections that would spawn their own ripples of kindness. The United Nations Global Compact meeting in New York marked another milestone in the Ripple Project's journey. But this time, Mr. Singh wasn't alone on stage. He had insisted on bringing voices from every level of the movement, from Ray with his social media expertise to the cafe owner who had witnessed it all begin. The presentation began with a video compilation that brought tears to the eyes of even the most seasoned diplomats. It showed simple acts of kindness transforming lives across the globe, a CEO in Mumbai spending her weekends teaching computer skills to street children, a London investment firm turning their expensive lobby into a shelter for the homeless during winter nights, a Chilean corporation creating a program to help elderly artisans preserve and teach their traditional crafts. What started as one person being late to work, Mr. Singh explained to the assembled leaders, has revealed something we've known all along but somehow forgot, that in business, as in life, we are all connected. Every decision we make creates ripples that touch countless lives. During the lunch break, a surprise visitor approached their table, the client whose meeting Mr. Singh had missed on that fateful morning. The man had followed the Ripple Project story and had transformed his own company's culture, making it a leader in corporate social responsibility. Missing that meeting was the best thing that could have happened, he said, shaking Mr. Singh's hand warmly. It made me realize I was running my business the wrong way. Now, we measure success not just in profits, but in positive impact. Back at Sweet Morning's cafe, the regulars had gathered to watch the UN presentation on a large screen set up by Ray's tech team. The cafe had become more than just a coffee shop, it was a living testament to the power of kindness in action. Every morning, business people would come not just for coffee, but to participate in what they called kindness hours, offering their skills and time to help others in need. The cafe's new ramp had inspired similar accessibility improvements throughout the neighborhood. Local businesses, seeing the impact of inclusive design, had started their own initiatives to make their spaces more welcoming to everyone. The street had become known as Kindness Row, attracting visitors from around the world who wanted to see where the Ripple Project began. Mrs. Patel's company, NextGen Solutions, had evolved as well. They had created a Department of Corporate Kindness, headed by Ray, which helped other companies implement similar programs. Their quarterly, kindness reports, were now considered as important as financial statements by investors who recognized that sustainable success required both profit and purpose. But it was the personal stories that touched Mr. Singh most deeply. Like the young intern who had been inspired to start a program connecting corporate professionals with refugee job seekers, helping them navigate the business world in their new country. Or the retired executive who now spent his days teaching financial literacy in underserved communities, using his decades of experience to help others build better futures. During the afternoon session at the UN, Mr. Singh shared these stories, emphasizing that the Ripple Project wasn't about grand gestures or massive charitable donations, it was about making kindness an integral part of daily business operations. We're not asking companies to choose between profit and kindness, he explained. We're showing them that the two can go hand in hand. When we create a culture of caring, everyone benefits, employees, customers, communities, and yes, even the bottom line. The statistics backed up his words. Companies that had implemented the Ripple Project's principles reported higher employee retention rates, increased customer loyalty, and improved community relations. More importantly, they were attracting a new generation of talented young professionals who wanted their work to have meaning beyond a paycheck. As the day drew to a close, the UN Secretary-General made an unprecedented announcement. The Ripple project would be integrated into the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, recognized as a model for how businesses could contribute to global well-being while maintaining profitability. That evening, as Mr. Singh walked through Times Square, he saw the Ripple project's logo displayed on the massive digital billboards, alongside a simple message: kindness is good business. Tourists stopped to take photos, sharing them with hashtags that would spread the message even further. His phone buzzed with a message from the cafe owner back home. She had hosted a kindness workshop that day, teaching other small business owners how to create welcoming spaces for people with disabilities. The photos she sent showed a diverse group of entrepreneurs eagerly learning about inclusive design, accessibility, and the business benefits of compassion. Another message came from Mrs. Chen, his former supervisor. She had just launched a program at Rivera and Associates called Second Chances, hiring people who had lost jobs due to acts of kindness. The program was already changing lives, giving people opportunities to work in environments that valued their humanity as much as their skills. Walking back to his hotel, Mr. Singh passed a small deli where the owner was helping a wheelchair user navigate the narrow aisles. Their eyes met, and they shared a knowing smile, another ripple, another life touched, another small act of kindness making the world a little bit better. In his hotel room, Mr. Singh opened his laptop to find thousands of new messages from people around the world sharing their own Ripple stories. Each one was unique, yet they all shared a common thread: the recognition that business could be a force for good when guided by compassion and caring. As he prepared for bed, Mr. Singh reflected on how much had changed since that winter morning at the cafe. What had seemed like the end of his career had actually been the beginning of a global movement. He thought about all the people who had lost jobs, opportunities, or status because they chose kindness over convenience, and how the Ripple project was helping create a world where such choices would be celebrated, not punished. 1 year after the UN presentation, Sweet Mornings Cafe hosted a special celebration. People from around the world had gathered to commemorate what they now called Kindness Day, the anniversary of Mr. Singh helping Ray up that icy ramp. The cafe had been transformed, with photos and stories covering its walls, each one a testament to how a single act of kindness could change countless lives. Ray, now a respected business leader in his own right, had organized the event. His jewelry business had evolved into a global enterprise that exclusively employed people with disabilities, proving that compassion and profit could coexist beautifully. But more than his business success, Ray was proud of the mentorship program he'd created, helping other entrepreneurs with disabilities turn their dreams into reality. "You know what's amazing?" Ray said to Mr. Singh as they watched the crowd mingle. "We're not just changing how business works, we're changing how people see themselves and their potential." The evidence was all around them. A group of business school students were presenting their thesis on the economics of kindness, using data from companies that had implemented the Ripple project's principles. Their research showed something remarkable: businesses that prioritized kindness were consistently outperforming their traditional counterparts. Mrs. Patel, whose initial email had changed everything, shared how NextGen Solutions had become a case study in sustainable business practices. Their Department of Corporate Kindness had expanded into a full-fledged consulting division, helping companies worldwide integrate compassion into their business models. "But the numbers only tell part of the story," she said, gesturing to the cafe full of people. "Look at these connections, these relationships. This is the real measure of success." The cafe owner had prepared special Ripple blend coffee for the occasion, served in cups decorated with messages of kindness. She shared how her business had tripled since becoming the unofficial headquarters of the Ripple project, but more importantly, how it had become a sanctuary where kindness was the universal language. A surprise guest arrived, the elderly woman Mr. Singh had seen outside the deli in New York. She had tracked down the cafe after reading about the celebration online. "I wanted to tell you what happened after that day," she explained. "The deli owner who helped me? He started a program where local businesses collaborate to make their spaces more accessible. We call it the Sing Standard because of you. Throughout the day, stories continued to pour in. A corporate lawyer who had been inspired to start a pro bono program for small businesses. A tech company that had created an app connecting skilled professionals with community needs. A manufacturing plant that had redesigned its entire operation to accommodate workers with different abilities. Mr. Singh's former client, whose missed meeting had sparked this journey, stood up to make an announcement. His company had created a kindness investment fund, providing capital to businesses that demonstrated strong social impact alongside financial returns. We're not just funding companies, he explained. We're funding a revolution in how business can serve humanity. As the afternoon sun streamed through the cafe windows, Mrs. Chen arrived with exciting news. Rivera and Associates had undergone a complete transformation. Their Second Chances program had been so successful that other firms were following suit. They had even created a Chief Kindness Officer position, focusing entirely on fostering a culture of compassion and community involvement. But here's the best part, she said, her eyes twinning. Remember that client we lost the day you were fired? They came back. Not just as a client, but as a partner in our community initiatives. They said they wanted to be part of a company that valued people over profits. The cafe's young barista, now in his final year of business school, shared how the Ripple project had influenced his generation's approach to business. We don't see kindness as an extra, he explained. It's fundamental to how we want to work and live. A group of international business leaders who had flown in for the celebration presented Mr. Singh with a unique gift, a digital map showing all the documented ripples of kindness his actions had inspired. The visualization was stunning, showing how one act of helping someone up a ramp had sparked changes across continents and cultures. Mrs. Wu's son, connecting via video call from Hong Kong, shared how the Sing initiative had spread throughout Asia's business community. Companies were competing to create the most innovative kindness programs, leading to improvements in working conditions, community support, and environmental stewardship. As evening approached, Ray unveiled the celebration centerpiece, a documentary titled The Ripple Effect, featuring interviews with people whose lives had been touched by the movement. The film showed how the Ripple project had influenced everything from corporate policies to architectural design, from education to healthcare. But you know what's most powerful about all of this? Ray asked the gathered crowd. It's not just about business anymore. It's about remembering who we are as human beings. Every time someone chooses kindness over convenience, they're not just helping one person, they're healing the world a little bit. Mr. Singh, listening to these stories, felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had grown from that simple morning decision. He thought about all the people who had lost jobs or opportunities because they chose to be kind, and how the Ripple project was creating a world where such choices were celebrated rather than punished. As the celebration continued into the evening, the cafe became a microcosm of the change they'd created. Business leaders chatted with students, sharing insights and dreams. People with disabilities discussed workplace design with architects and engineers. Community organizers planned collaborations with corporate executives. The cafe owner brought out a special cake decorated with the Ripple Project's logo, a simple ripple pattern that had become a globally recognized symbol of business with heart. As they cut the cake, someone started sharing their own Ripple story, then another, and another. Each story was unique, yet they all shared the same message: kindness wasn't just good for the soul, it was good for business, good for community, good for the world. As the celebration at Sweet Mornings Cafe drew to a close, Mr. Singh found himself drawn to the old ramp outside, the one that had started it all. Though it had been replaced with a better design months ago, the cafe owner had preserved a small section of it, mounted on the wall with a simple plaque, "Where kindness met business." And changed both forever. Standing there in the quiet evening air, he remembered his feelings of despair the day he lost his job. Who could have imagined that moment of crisis would spark a global movement? A young journalist approached him, asking for his reflections on the year's achievements. "You know," Mr. Singh said thoughtfully, "people keep calling me brave for helping Ray that morning. But it wasn't bravery, it was simply being human. What's remarkable is how many people were waiting for permission to bring their humanity to work." The next morning, as the sun rose over the city, Mr. Singh arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. He had an important meeting, not with business leaders or UN officials, but with a group of recently fired employees from various companies. Each had lost their job for choosing kindness over corporate policy. "Your story gave us hope," said a former bank manager who had been fired for spending too much time helping elderly customers understand digital banking. "But more than that, it showed us a path forward." Through the Ripple Project's network, each of these individuals had already received multiple job offers from companies that shared their values. But they weren't just looking for new jobs, they wanted to become ripple makers themselves. Ray joined the meeting, his laptop open to show their latest initiative, the Kindness Career Network, a platform connecting compassionate professionals with companies committed to the Ripple Project's principles. "We're not just changing corporate culture," Ray explained, "we're creating an alternative corporate ecosystem." Mrs. Patel arrived with more encouraging news. The latest economic research showed that companies adopting the Ripple Project's approach were seeing unprecedented levels of customer loyalty, employee satisfaction, and community support. The business world was finally getting hard data on what they had known all along: kindness was a powerful business strategy. "But here's what really matters," she said, showing them a different set of statistics. Depression rates among employees at participating companies have dropped significantly. Stress-related health issues are down. People are happier, more fulfilled, more connected. The cafe began filling with regular morning customers, each with their own Ripple story to share. The young mother who had received help with her stroller had started a successful consulting firm helping companies design family-friendly workplaces. The elderly gentleman who had been helped at the deli in New York had become a sought-after speaker on accessible business design. Mr. Singh watched as a new customer struggled with the cafe door while carrying too many bags. Without hesitation, 3 people rushed to help: a CEO, a delivery person, and a student. No one thought twice about it. Kindness had become the natural response. Mrs. Chen stopped by on her way to work, sharing how Rivera and Associates had become a leader in corporate kindness initiatives. "Remember how worried we used to be about that big client?" she laughed. "Now we have companies competing to work with us because of our values, not despite them." A group of international business students arrived, eager to share their research. They had analyzed thousands of companies worldwide and found a clear pattern: those that integrated kindness into their business model weren't just more profitable, they were more resilient during economic downturns, more innovative in problem solving, and more successful in attracting top talent. But the most interesting finding, one student explained, is how these changes ripple out into the community. Crime rates drop in areas where Ripple Project companies operate. Volunteer participation increases. Even health outcomes improve. As the morning progressed, Mr. Singh received an unexpected call from his old client, the one whose missed meeting had cost him his job. The man was calling from Dubai, where he had just opened a new office. "We built kindness into its design from the ground up," he explained excitedly. "Prayer rooms for all faiths, accessibility features everywhere, community spaces open to the public. People said it would be too expensive, but it's already proving to be our most profitable location." Ray, who had been quietly working on his laptop, suddenly called everyone's attention. The Ripple Project's tracking system had just recorded its millionth documented act of corporate kindness. As they watched, the number continued to climb, a real-time testament to how many people were choosing compassion over convenience, humanity over hierarchy. "But you know what's really beautiful?" Ray said, zooming out on the map. "Look at how each act creates its own ripples. We're not just tracking numbers, we're watching kindness spread across the world." As the day drew to a close, Mr. Singh sat at his regular table, reflecting on the journey. The cafe had grown quieter, but the energy of kindness remained palpable. A young employee was helping an elderly customer with his phone. A business owner was mentoring a struggling startup founder. Small acts of kindness, multiplying endlessly. Mrs. Wu came in for her evening tea, proudly sharing photos from her son's latest kindness initiative in Hong Kong. He says business is changing in Asia, she beamed. Young people don't want to work for companies that only care about money. They want to make a difference. The cafe owner joined them, bringing a fresh pot of the special Ripple blend coffee. You know what I love most, she said, pouring cups for everyone. Every morning, I get to watch kindness in action. It's not just business anymore, it's a movement, a way of life. As the last customer left, Mr. Singh stood by the window, watching the city lights come on. He thought about that icy morning that had changed everything, the split-second decision to help someone up a ramp, the job loss. That had seemed like an ending but was really a beginning. Ready to go? Ray asked, packing up his laptop. Mr. Singh nodded, but paused at the door. You know what I've learned from all this, he said softly. It's not about choosing between kindness and success. It's about redefining what success means. And sometimes, losing everything is just the universe's way of helping you find something better. Together, they stepped out into the evening, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to create ripples of kindness in the world of business, one small act at a time.